Well, we made it.
We made it.
Hey, thanks. First of all, thank you for asking me to do this. This has been obviously we've known each other for a little while, and you were doing this podcast, and I know a little bit, and we've chatted over the years or whatever, um, but you then went away, and so today was going to be a lot of fun. You said, Chris, I'd like you to interview me, and I said the first thought that came to my mind was like he wants me to interrogate him. Is if he's asking me, then this might sound like more of an interrogation. So I apologize in advance if this feels like an interrogation more than an interview. Uh, I'll be like, prove it. Um, but hey, man, I'm having a lot of fun just being with you anyway. So hopefully this is illuminating to the people listening. Obviously, certainly it's going to be illuminating to me because we've had touch and go moments over the years, or the last year or so, where we've caught up. But between busy lives and schedules, you have gotten married in that time. I've moved city. There's so much that happens. So I'm really glad to be here. And so I think one of my first questions that I have for you is where the heck have you been and why?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, first off, thank you for doing this. And it is always a pleasure to be able to be together. And real quick shout out to Ben for the great idea to bring you into this space, and you're the perfect one to do it. I'm up for any interrogation, Chris North.
Perfect.
Um, the it was a interesting the last podcast episode was 1 year ago, October actually, so a little less than a year ago. And then before that episode was a few months. And I noticed a sort of natural drift as my maybe my purpose or my connection to the purpose of releasing episodes and proactively um, being in the TRU-U podcast. It sort of drifted, I think, naturally as life presented opportunities and challenges to me and my family. And I say those two together because I think that they go hand in hand. And I realized it naturally drifted away, and then I think this is actually insight into many areas of many of our lives is when something maybe that was once a very first focus priority, or something that was very proactive in our minds, drifts away. And I think that what had happened was God had presented me with really urgent needs to shift focus. Even in my day-to-day career, I shifted focus. And I think also being gone for that year um has helped bring in a lot of new growth and new um touching points to bring back to this space. And I realized again God called me back into it. And I think aligning, you asked me before this, what's the purpose and the vision of this? I think that that's very critical to know and to be connected to, um, really always to to maintain and to build momentum and to follow through on these things. Um, but I would say that there's life had presented challenges and opportunities that
You're
took me away. So
I appreciate that, like the 30,000 foot flyover view. My guess is that if you're listening to this right now, you're thinking, uh, be more specific. What the heck happened? What are we doing? I
yeah.
would love for you, if you're open to it, as much as you're open and willing to share. You'd said something. You're like it drifted naturally, and then I want to bring you
Mhm.
back to that and go, what was the natural drift? What was actually happening where something was drifting naturally? Because um, and I'll peel back the curtain a little bit and show you what I'm thinking is really because you had said like something that is really bright and shining in your life and really something that you're like focused on all of a sudden begins to fade or drift, if we're going to use that language. And I'm
Mhm.
wondering if people listening to this are experiencing a version of that at different places in their own lives, or they have in the past. And it can be potentially really
Yeah.
confusing to have something that we're like so all about, so passionate about, and then having that thing
Yeah.
actually fade. And then
Yeah.
being able to one is to recognize it when it's happening. Uh, two is if you had any, I would love to know if there's any judgments around that. And then three, like now you're back, and it is something you're passionate about. And so I'm wondering how all of those things are working for you in a way that is going to be really beneficial for somebody to hear and go like, hey, I think that's me. That's what's
Yeah.
happening in my life right now. Um,
Yeah, I think there's a couple parts to that, and I can be specific to an extent.
sure.
There are very urgent, family, uh, focuses, we can call them, that required, I think, a pause on, um, not only this podcast, but also, as you remember, a year ago, I left Novus and went into another, world, and even while I was going through that transition, emergencies in life, disrupted a normal flow, and I actually think that there's no judgment around that. I think that I'll actually that's now today I'm sitting here and I'm grateful for it. I think there's a lot of scarcity at the time when my control brain wanted to figure out how to do
Hmm.
all of the things like the podcast, like coaching, and still manage, the emergencies, and God told me that, you know what, no, you you really can't, or at
And
least
so,
can't, I
just to
think.
pause you for a second, just to be clear, for those of you who may be listening, being like, we don't know who like where did you come from before it was happening, and you said even you said I left Novus at that time, I stopped doing the. Novus Global is an executive coaching firm. If you're not familiar with it, that coaches some of the most exciting people in the world. By the way, that's everyone. And so, but
Yeah.
typically, what that can mean is we coach pro athletes. We coach uh, different people in different high level spheres, all the way down to entrepreneurs trying to figure their life out. Ethan was uh, humming right along. He was a part of our team. I also am a coach at Novus Global. If you haven't figured that out by now, he was humming right along, and one of the bright shining stars in our world in terms of both revenue creation. I actually got to sit with a few of his clients. He's been on our podcast, and I haven't not met a person who has not hired Ethan and then raved about it in terms of either what they've gotten personally, what they've gotten professionally, and um, really you were doing well. And I'm talking about like to the tune of, and I hope you don't mind, you can edit this out if you don't want to, but like to the tune of like hundreds of thousands of dollars, amazing clients. You got to go into to be in different spaces with different companies and different
Mhm.
people, and then you started a podcast. You were doing all these things, and you were just moving. And then you got married at the same time, like everything
Yeah.
moving and moving and moving,
Yeah.
and then and then all
Well,
of a
that's a good
sudden,
point. Sorry to jump. Are you
yeah,
wrapped
no
up?
problem. I,
I'm eager to talk on it
I'm
because
just
it's a
catching
good
up our
point.
audience because some people may not know
Yeah,
what we're talking about, and I want to give a little bit more context and a little bit more color to it, so that when people see how dramatic the
absolutely.
transition was, that they understand it
Absolutely. It
a
was
little
not
more
easy,
clearly.
and it was something that I wrestled with for months with the Novus one, and the podcast, um, being a auxiliary, I wouldn't call it, maybe it could be considered a hobby, but more of a side, um, piece to the
Sure.
gifts I wanna give the world. It was a sister to the coaching. The coaching was a really difficult decision to make, um, and, eh, sometimes I feel that life presents, um, necessary shifts, endings, and even when we don't want it necessarily or expect it, life does that to us, and I think there's purpose that, for me, I believe God puts there, and maybe for our listeners, just to even hold with an open hand that there's a possibility that there's a calling for us, and there's something that energies outside of our personal mindset and who we think we have to be. We're actually called into other directions, and that was certainly my marriage. I joke with people. I met her with a DJ in a pickup truck, and she would have never went for me if it wasn't for being forced to sit next to me in a pickup truck, which was awesome. That worked out well, and then that led to, within that year. we did decide to get married, and I'm grateful for that, and it's changed my life. And then in that, there's a whole lot of challenges and opportunities that come. And when there's that linking of two human beings, it just feels like that's what's on my heart. I have to do this. This is what God's telling me to do. This is my woman in my life. Um, there I think is going to be some natural progression in life, and I think that what I noticed, and I won't speak specifically on some of these challenges, but some really big challenges came with that, and ones that we wouldn't have foreseen coming, but challenges that came and arise, and then I realized that, wow, I can't outwork uh, the necessary growth. I cannot do my way out of this. I cannot force myself to um, be busy or to coach or to do podcasts when energetically I'm being called into, at least for this season, um, not. And that's what I realized, is that I was called into. I felt a deep calling to go back into real estate, and there's purposes to that. Throughout that time frame, I was learning a lot about real estate and getting licensed, but I was also called into quality time and putting all of my weapon, sword, my battle gear down to the ground and surrendering and to be fully present, um, to what's happening in that season, which was about a year ago. So I think, and then with that season, because you talk about seasons, and I'd love for you even to touch on that a little bit. I realize, okay, yeah, a big lesson here is to receive what he's calling me into, and to drop the um, the doing and the control, and to be very present, and um, and that season was certainly a slowing down season, and I resisted the hell out of it, which made it really hard to not do the podcast and to not coach.
Yeah, I would thank you for backing that up a little bit for us. And then, by the
Yeah.
way, also, if you don't know Ethan, he also does real estate. He's got stuff going on in multiple states. He also owns another couple other businesses. And so I think, Ethan, when you're talking about you're like things just naturally drifted away, and things came to a halt. I think, if I can, what I'm noticing is I go like, oh, maybe it felt natural to you, but it also occurs to me like it was a very intentional choice to put some things down. You just said, like, put down some of your armor, some of your battle stuff that you go to work with every day, and where it actually, uh, like, the circumstances might have been natural, just given a transition in career, transition in marriage. All of these types of things are natural as things progress. And you made some very intentional, unnatural choices in the middle of what was a natural
Mhm.
progression of life. And I would love to hear you speak a little bit to uh, what that was like. Was that challenging? Was that easy? When you decided to lay things down, did were you immediately hit with anxiety, or were you immediately hit with peace? And what was that like? Tell me, just walk us through that a little bit for you.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, decisions happen in a moment, but the at least for me, and I'm sure for a lot of the listeners, they don't come very easily. I resisted, um, which I think came with a cost too. But I resisted um, slowing down on the podcast, and I resisted exiting Novus. I resisted massive focus towards our health and the other challenges that we had going on. So I resisted the hell out of it, and then and then I decided, and the decision came with it came to the point where I was on my knees needing to make the decision, where God's like, quit it, you know, like it's time, So, but then the decision when that happened, yeah, that was backed with a sense of uh, release, a sense of um, like a backpack you just take off your back,
Mm.
and, uh, and a lot of uncertainty, and the uncertainty it was a little scary. It was a little scary, and I think that that comes with, big life decisions too, is that there'll be a mixture of experiences that you can have. One is excitement, another one is uncertainty, nervous energy. I think that those are oftentimes, um, partnered up, but, yeah, the decision was freeing, and I want this is just coming up for me. I wanna let people know that when you're saying no to something and going to something new, that doesn't mean that, um, you're leaving everybody or that world, necessarily behind. I stay in great contact with Novus, and I love the people, and we still, you know, partner on the side with things, and get to serve people, send people to Novus. I still get to have our hangouts here, and I still serve clients in just a different facet. I still coach in a different arena now. And the podcast, I think, I felt like, man, I'm giving up on this, but now here we are again. I feel a resurgence, and there's an energy to come back. So I think that the seasonal aspect is really important. I think that there's times where it's very clear that we need to pause, or we need to, slow down and assess life. We need to try on something new that we feel called into, and take a chance. And I think that comes outside of us. I think that we'll be reminded of those things, and I was reminded over and over and over again. So,
Yeah, that I was actually thinking about that is, you had said this, and we're gonna get into, even the name of the podcast is TRU-U, right? And so,
yeah.
there's something that you said earlier. You said, some something along the lines, and I'll paraphrase it, but it's like, being somebody that we think we have to be.
Mhm,
And I'm wondering if that is like an indicator of resistance. But my real question is, why you think? My guess is that anybody listening to this has had some version of this in their lives, or they're up to it right now, where there is uh, a sense of resistance to something that they know that they should do. And when I say know that they should do, there's clarity. There's something that's going. This is not exactly right for me. This is no longer working for me. Something I'm not exactly sure what that is, and we could debate that all day long. We won't. Um, but you had said this, and I think it's instinctive for so many people. You said, as soon as I laid this down, as soon as I made the call, as soon as the decision was made, it was like a weight lifted, and we've heard that time and time again. I would love to hear why you think so many people, so much of the time, know that that's going to be the
mhm.
result of laying something down, or surrendering something, or stopping something, and we still resist it. Why do we do that?
Well, because we don't know what's on the other side, because we don't know, because it hasn't happened yet, because we maybe our faith is being tested, because, it is new, and there is, with anything new, there's uncertainty. We cannot be certain
Mm,
that we're going to, um, make $1,000,000 if we do this new job, or that we're going to love where we move, or that we're going to, whatever it is, moving, new job, new career, new relationship. We cannot be certain. Even though all of our energy and our if there's enough data, I think, at some point to where you can make logical sense of it, but I also think there's an energetic component that's even more compelling for me, that when the door is being knocked on enough by God saying, "Hey, wake up," um, for me, that's where it's like, okay, it's time. But I think there's also data, that can back up, making, calculated decisions. But I think if people are in resistance, that's natural, and I think that acceptance of the way that we are experiencing it is important. I think that, "Oh, look at there, you can observe, I'm resisting this, or I'm nervous about this." It's very human of us to experience life like that, and I think that there's a calling in that. There's something in that, and I think that's where curiosity can come in, and, "Okay, well, what could that be?" And then I think it's really important for us to make sense of, well, how do I do this where I'm um, I'm accepting of the leap, if we'll call it, and I call it that, the leap, and I think I struggled with that, but when I made commitment, which is another coaching word that we talk about all the time, around this is what makes sense of the leap, then I did it. But I urge people to, when you're experiencing resistance and you feel like change is knocking on your door, um, double click on it, get super curious about it, look for data, get feedback, and then find out what you can commit to be calculated, and what you can make sense of. Because the in between, Chris, the in between is not a place that you want to be very long. And I
Yeah,
spent a lot of time in betweens, and they are very it's there's more uncertainty, I think, in the in between, and more stress, more, because you're living a life that is a old you when there's this new you waiting for you, and we've already in some aspect given up on this old, right, when we're so drawn to this new. So there's this middle ground that's not a firm foundation to stand on, and when you're not standing on a firm foundation, you get things get wonky.
that's the technical term for it, I imagine.
That is the technical term. Things
Things
get
get
wonky when
wonky.
you're, yeah,
Yeah. I want to, this might feel a little bit like a really hard left or right turn.
that's
But
fine, I'm used to it. You're my coach
yeah,
for
right.
4 years. Yeah,
That's
you
fair.
bullied me. Yeah, it's like Chris used to shove me in little coaching lockers and bully me and shoot spit wads. No, I'm just kidding. No,
I,
you go right where you need to go. Thank you for
you know,
going where exactly where we need to go
if
whenever we
that's
need
what
to
it
go.
takes, if that's what it takes.
Yeah.
You've said multiple times that God showed you, or that your faith is leading you, or that there's some version of this. And so, um, for maybe
Mhm.
us who are a little more uninitiated into what that means and how that works, and how, because there's a lot of, I, I make up that there's a lot of people who would go like, oh, it's really easy to just say, well, because God told me to, because how can I argue with
Uh-huh.
that, so, or God's calling me to something. I'd love to hear you just communicate with me, with our audience here, a little bit, what that was
Mhm.
like for you, and how, because I make up also that in the more true moments for us, if we're talking about being truly ourselves, we actually do hope, or at least speak for myself, do hope that, um, that there is something more that is calling me to something greater, that there is
Yeah.
an external, uh, or
Yeah.
maybe even some version of an internal that, uh,
Yeah.
God, that
Um,
we're talking about. I'd love to hear you just talk about that, because it seems to be a really key part of this entire
it's
movement for you.
everything. It's everything. I mean, I'd consider myself before this year, or this last year and a half, being a man of faith, a Christian specifically, but very open to, like, I my wife is part Jewish. We would attend Shabbats. I'm very open. I read the Book of Tao. I've read the Tibetan Book of the Dead. I've um, star sign astrology. My wife and I have experienced, like, and learned about that. So I think I'm not going to make this a religious, go in a certain direction podcast, but I do want to highlight that in spirituality, being able to surrender and then take notice of, maybe we can call them disruptions or insights, or opportunities, or anything. I mean, I think that when there's that sort of stimulus that's coming outside of us, that I think it's healthy for people um to consider that that's coming from some source that's outside of us. It's bigger than us. Whatever they want to consider that. That could be the universe, it could be God, it could be whatever, their grandmother that's deceased. I don't care what it is. I think that for me, surrendering and knowing that there's something that's created all of this, all of what we are, all of what you are, all of what I am, all of what I see outside of my window is, and everywhere else, that's not from a human. We're living in it. That's from God. That's from something bigger, more significant. And I think that we have a loving God that when we are willing to let him in, which means dropping our ego and getting out of our mind and out of our sense of control, survivalistic ways of living life, we can let him in. And I think he, even when we're in our ego, which we all find ourselves in at some point, is when it can be a little bit more painful. When he kind of really alerts you that there's something here for you to change up. And I don't even remember your question, which shows how good I'm listening. But what I'm getting at is the spiritual. I think it's about the spiritual aspect in God. Um, when we're on our knees, um, and our sense of control cannot, we cannot um, justify or find a way or whatever we want to call it to get out of whatever situation we're in or to create something. We realize that we're just a human, and when we're on our knees and give our heart to receive the universe or God's wisdom, I think that um, that's one of the most uncomfortable and freeing things at the same time. And I think throughout the last year, I've been more and more accepting after I was in my ego or in my survival um, ways of thinking. I realized more and more that the further I can open up and let him in, um, and get curious about what he could be trying to tell me, um, and then acting on what I think he's trying to tell me. Um, it's that's what's led me to not only strengthen my faith, but to find hope and to find direction. And I think it comes in many ways. There's actually a shout out to Andy. If I actually, I don't know, I don't think she'll mind. So I'll say it. I'll get her confirmation that I can share this before we post it. But she's shared what she's done, like God letters, where she'll actually like, just get out of our head, ask God a question, and let Him answer it. Like, just and then let the pen be on the paper. Just sit with it. Don't think, sit with it. I've listened to other, and then that letter can be revealing. I've listened to other podcasts, and there's prayer and asking specific questions, and then waiting for an answer. And sometimes we're just talking to God when we're driving or we're walking down the street, or sometimes we're and he'll reveal little things to us. You'll see something on a sign that's revealing, or some spiritual angel numbers, or the person down the street will walk by you, and then they'll say something that gets you really thinking in a different direction. And then all of these sort of clues, I think, can manifest into becoming what we call a calling from God. But I think we got to pay attention, and I think we got to
Mhm.
get out of our ego, which means not fighting, not being in too much of control mode. I think that it's listening for him, and the faith is what drives listening. So I could go on about this for an hour, but there's a very critical um moments like that that have happened, at times some much more elegant than other times. Sometimes it was me on my knees, other times it was, "Oh, I'm getting the hang of this thing. I think I know how to talk to God now, and I think I'm really getting into my faith. Let's see." And some of them a little bit more um, elegant, I think is the word. But yeah, there's a lot of critical times like that. A few of them
You mean
for
there's
sure.
elegance and then there's the ugly cry? Is that is that the
Yeah, the ugly cry, but he's going to give you what you need either
uh,
way.
hey,
That's
listen.
my experience. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for
Was that
going
does
there and
that
for sharing that.
does that make sense to you? What's your take on
No,
that?
no, it
Because
doesn't at all. Go again. Try again.
okay. Yeah, let me go back
Of
15
course.
minutes because I think I
Yeah.
just talked about that, yeah. Yeah.
No, man, I appreciate you saying it because you've alluded to it a few times, and so it felt like a disservice to anybody listening to go like, okay, like we're assuming where he's coming from, but we're not actually clear what does that mean or how does that work. And so now I'd love to see if we can use that as a parlay into we've covered a little bit of the past, and we're a little more than half done with this thing at this point. For those of you listening who will make it all the way, I would love for this to be a pivoting point for us. And we've heard where you come from. We've heard why you stopped. We've heard what that a little bit
Yeah.
of what that journey was like for you. And if I could, I'd say, okay, Ethan has moved towards surrender for a year, where he's focusing on laying down the ego, laying down all the tools for him to go take care of himself and have control and all of those things. I'd love to hear
Mhm.
now, if we made a pivot, we're here today, and which means it's an indicator that there will be further podcasts. There will be more things going on. You've alluded to the fact that you're still doing some work.
Yeah.
So I'd love to hear a little bit about what it's like, uh, and we'll get into the details of you. But I want for the people listening to go like, how do we know when it's time to come back online? And
Yeah.
is a question that I'd have for you. What was that like for you as you processed towards uh, maybe we'll call it
Yeah.
the end of that particular season?
Yeah, yeah. Well, there's 77 episodes, so we had a good run. Um, and it was a lot of fun and invaluable, very valuable, and learned a lot. And then we talked about it already. There's the season of the shifting things, and I don't want to make that sound like an excuse. I love doing the podcast. I lost sight of it, and then it turned into a extended pause. And
Yeah.
I'm very eager to be back here. Very eager to be back here, and why is because everything that we just talked about a minute ago been very revealing that I need to get back here because there's a lot of very amazing transformational um, messages, um, impactful wisdom that can be shared with the world. That's why I'm back here, if I'm going to put it in a nutshell. And the true you is about living your version of your truest life, true you. And I'm sticking to that theme. I think I've just learned a lot more about that, and I felt like there was so much over the last year and a half that's happened where it's like, okay, it's time to give that back, and to commit to it. The commitment is 2 of these episodes a month if we're going to get specific, and it's also going to be to really be selective with who we get to interview. I love the first 77 people. I think you're one of them. Love you. And there's so many wonderful walks of life, and there'll be a great variety of people that come on. But I do not but and I'm going to step it up further with the intentionality around who we select as guests, and also some of the content I do want to. I'm considering. I won't give it away, but I'm considering doing um, certain bits of material to train some of what the experiences were that I've had in between interviews. Won't get into that, but I'm looking at this. I'm just going to share this. You and I have talked about it. This book has radically shifted my life. If people haven't read it, read it. The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle. It talks about social consciousness. I'm certainly being called into helping people and with their consciousness and being aware of who they are, how they're showing up, and how they're living. And there's concepts of that book about surrender, like we talked about being present, and I think there's a lot that has happened where I specifically that got to give that back, but also I've been very blessed to be I guess in the latter half of that time frame with the disruption. After that disruption and surrender came almost like a sponge soaking up a new like all of the little gifts and gadgets God's given me now. It's like just soaking it up, and now, reading a book a week, every other week at least, and having a lot of good stuff to talk about, entering into new careers, meeting a lot of new people, and being much more spiritual. I've realized, okay, it's time to really run with this thing with the TRU-U podcast. So um, we're back.
So he's coming back. All right. Yeah, that and thanks for. I always like to just let you talk because You're
I'll
going to
do
answer
it.
five. I'm going to ask you one.
I'll do
I
it if
believe
you
you
let
will.
me. I won't
I
stop.
believe he will. I'll ask you one question. You'll answer six,
Yeah.
and that's
You know, not yeah,
yeah.
that's not what we signed up for either, folks. But that's why I get to usually ask the questions, so that way the other people get to talk. But
It's I love it. It makes my job a lot easier. Um, but we are all talking about the coming out of a season where you're laying things down and you're coming back into how do you actually come back? I've talked to a few people who have gone like, hey, I'm actually there is a mild apprehension, if you will. I'm putting it lightly. Some people will be like, that scares the crap out of me, like to go back into the thing because they don't want things to come off the rails again, or they don't want to feel the pressure again. There's something. So I'd love to hear you talk about uh, how to how to think about that, or how to see that if people are taking a time of intentional sabbatical, they are coming back online,
mhm.
what are some guardrails that they can put in place, or how can they make sure that the thing that led them to to the first laying
Yeah,
everything down doesn't necessarily need to happen again?
yeah. Um, I think that in the what we're calling the sabbatical, the we can get curious in that time as well about who we get to be in, if we want to call it maybe reentry or uh, active time or
Yeah,
coming out of the other end of grieving or healing or whatever it is. I think that in that time we get to soak in some of the insight into who we get to become. I would hope that people use their sabbatical time for curiosity and to strengthen their faith and to plan and all those things. But um, I think that it's important to remember who we were and what led us to maybe energy building and energy draining experiences up to this point in life. I think that it's really important that we take inventory of who we have been. And I think that we use that data to create what we're calling um, what you referred to as guardrails or something like that. I think that you use that data to, well, what wasn't working? Why am I going through this season? And what do I not want to happen again? And then make commitments. Henry Cloud wrote a really good book called Boundaries. Read that. He also wrote a really good book called Necessary Endings. Read that. And um, I think that it is important that we make commitments, and I think it's important that we enroll people that are in our life to walk with us in them in some extent. Our wife, our husband, our significant other, our mom, dad, friend, business partner. I think it's important that we enroll them into who we're committed to being. Um, maybe not without we
what
don't
does
need
that
to
look
go.
like? Talk to me. I'm going to interrupt you because I just want to hear that. What
Yeah,
does it look like to enroll somebody into what you're up to
yeah.
in that journey?
Yeah, I don't think because some people I think may oftentimes think of that as alerting the paparazzi. That's not what it is. It's simply um, with those that we love, um, sharing our heart with them. I feel, and I think it is important for us to share our heart with those that we love, and to learn about what they desire, who they are, and when they're in their higher version of themselves and what they're going for in life. And I think it's important that they hear that from you too. And I think that in these sabbaticals or slow down seasons, we get to um, plan strategically after we share our hearts. Like, hey, I can use my wife for an example. It's like, hey, Sophia, we've gone through X, Y, and Z, and we really want to get to A, B, and C. This is what didn't work with X, Y, and Z. Can you call me out if I'm doing X, Y, and Z again? Can you lovingly disrupt that? That's one way of doing it. Or, hey, this is what I'm thinking for A, B, and C. I'm committed to these actions, nuclear actions, or strategies. Can we check in with one another? Can we have a call every week or every other week, or if it's your wife, can we talk about this intentionally over dinner once a week? Can we see what's working and what's not working? Can we see how my strategy to A, B, and C is? Am I of integrity? You can hire Chris North, that helps. But I think it's really important
So
that
if
we,
anybody wants to be thrown in a closet with spitballs, you just let me know,
yeah.
or a locker,
So
excuse me.
but I think it, yeah, I think it's important. I think healthy communication, it does not mean that you need to be over communicating. You can still be discerning. You can still, protect your IP or whatever people are concerned about, but having somebody that you really trust and love that's in it with you, that also may have an outside perspective, because when we're emotionally involved with something, we can justify certain things or stay in these, like that's where the resistance thing comes. Like we talked about earlier. I think and it's really healthy to have that outside perspective, and I think it's actually necessary. I don't, you don't find very many people. I don't think I've ever found one that has been successful doing everything on their own without any help. I just, I don't see that. So
Yeah, and not to anybody, not to anything that's going to be worth really
yeah, I mean, you
really
can do
going
20
for. Like,
jumping jacks. You can get skinny on your own. Still nice to have a trainer. But, if we're talking about building a business, if we're talking about, something like, I think something that's going to be deeply impactful and meaningful, I think even if we're doing it on our own, it's like you still are going to read, like, let's use the diet and the health thing. You're still going to get insight from others, still going to go shopping and have somebody sell you some product. You're still going to go to the gym and ask, the buff dude how he's doing his form and his squat.
you
So,
guys, please stop asking me. Please stop asking me at the gym
yeah, stop
how I get
asking
my
Chris.
how I get my physique. Hey, either I love
You
that
don't even
you
fit in your sweatpants anymore.
seriously. Thank you for
Chris
breaking
loves
things
sweatpants
down.
and beanies.
I
Chris
really
loves
do.
sweatpants and beanies.
I think
Yeah,
everyone does. It's just some of us are privileged
yeah,
enough to admit it and wear them publicly.
exactly.
Um, Ethan, I love that you took the time to break some of that down a little bit more practically. I think it's really challenging for some of us to hear share your heart with those you love. Um, I go, uh, what? I short out. And so I love that you
Mhm.
you spend some time going, okay, actually, like having an intentional conversation. It occurs to me that there's a lot of risk avoidance in my previous way of doing
Yeah,
things, where I go like, oh, okay, actually, it practically is to embrace a degree of risk in the relationship, to share with the people that I say I care the
yeah,
most about. As we're
yeah.
rounding out this, I have two more questions. I want to hear you talk a little bit about this while we have some time. Is the
Mhm.
um, the idea of being one's true self, and this is a topic that will be discussed long before us, long after us. Uh, for all
Uh-huh.
time, I'm sure. And I would love to hear you talk about what being like the truest version of yourself actually means, and how somebody might be um, understanding a little bit more about even that concept. And I think in further episodes, you'll probably get
Uh-huh.
into how people know that they're living their true selves, what gets in the way of those true selves. We don't have time for that today, but I'd love to hear you just talk a little bit about what just the basic premise of being your truest self is.
Yeah, great question.
Thank
I
you.
think
Thank you.
yeah, thank you, Chris. It's like you've interviewed people before. Um, TRU-U, I think that there's indicators of what it means to discover what that is for ourselves. And I think that one really key indicator is uh, what gives you the most energy and joy in life. If we were really to simplify it, what, who, where, get curious uh, about who you would be when you're in your power, in your energy, in your, like, the just the fullest version of you. And I think that um it's different for everyone, which makes it unique. That's why it's true to you, because what's true to someone else may not be true to you. But I think that the indicators are always going to be noticing your energy, noticing your experience in whether it's a career or in a relationship or where you're living. Uh, and just notice what you enjoy. And I think if we double click and go even further, it's noticing what impact you can give the world that lights you up the most. In what ways do you like helping people the most? In what ways do you like um, what ways do you experience the most energy by giving back or by spending time with people? What are you doing? And
I want to, if you
um,
don't mind, Nathan, I would love to pause you on that note, just because what you just said was so great. You just said what, and forgive me, it's going to be a bit of uh, a paraphrase, but you said what lights you up the most, what helps people the most, what there's like a connection to people. There's like this theme of service
mhm,
to others, and I think it's important to say this because what lights Hannibal Lecter up the most is not what I want somebody living into their most truest version. And I'm wondering if you could talk just 30 more seconds on the connection between being one's
mhm.
true self and in service to humanity, because I think we all know what it's like when people are acting like their truest, what they might call
Yeah,
their truest selves, and it's actually in detriment to others.
yeah. Um, I think that there's an element of deeper awareness that is our when we talk about consciousness, which I'll bring up more and more when we're in the podcast, is there's a deeper awareness that I would imagine Hannibal Lecter maybe was influenced by evil spirits and also probably had a hell of an ego and a lot of trauma. I mean, any serial killer, I'd imagine, has a lot that they're dealing with, and I think that the ego is our mind's identity of who we need to be to satisfy whatever survivalistic instincts that we have. Whether we want to look good, feel good, be right, be in control, we want to whatever it is. I think that our ego's way of thinking of our truest self is different than our sense of inner awareness, our without our mind cluttering or getting in the way. It's a natural energy, a natural receiving sort of experience that is bigger than what our mind's identity is, and I think that that takes serious slowing down to discover. And I think that it takes serious um, vulnerability to discover. I think peeling back the layers to what's below all that takes it does help to have a coach, a therapist, a professional, loved ones that are willing to go there with you because it is a bit of a self-discovery journey. And I think our true selves evolve and change over time. But I think that I really want to go back to that book because I really think that, and he's got another book called A New Earth, which is discovering your life's purpose. And I think that's Eckhart Tolle, Tolle. I don't know how to pronounce it, but
They'll figure it
um,
out.
yeah, but it really does involve the um, the curiosity from within, the letting the clutter, letting all that mind, the ego game go, and really slowing down and being okay with just allowing it to come to you how it does. It may not, you can't force it to come to you. There's just an open curiosity of a deeper sense that a deeper self that comes into that. I hope that was more than 30 seconds,
Hey,
but
listen, that was definitely more than 30 seconds. But I think people, we all know this. You know this as well as I do. Is while you're talking, people are actually talking to themselves as well. And I hope as we close this
Mhm,
out that there was not just the dialogue here between you and Ethan, but also then the dialogue between you and you, listener. Um, and I think what Ethan's really trying to, what my friend is trying to say here, I I love that quote. Never mind, nobody's going to get that reference. But Ethan, if I can, I'd say
yeah.
uh, what I think is standing out to me in that is you saying things like being connected with our truest self, being in service to one another, are actually inseparable. And when we're in service to one another, we actually
Mhm,
do create a ton of energy. And if we're not in service to one another, it usually is because we're not in or if that is not desirable to us in any given time, it's usually because we're actually not in our truest version of ourselves. And so, and so I really appreciate you sharing that. And by the way, I'm going to give a quick nod as we turn our corner here to Henry Cloud and Necessary Endings, simply because that's my dad joke of the day as we round this out and come to a close. But as we do come to this necessary ending, can I just ask you two last questions
Love the
that I
dad
just want
joke.
rapid fire answers on?
Yeah.
One is, what are you most excited for in life right now?
Mm. Um, to experience, um, it's really to jump over. I imagine jumping over a fence with all of the past, like sort of ego-driven or old identities, and leaping into this new greener side of the fence, and the grass is green. And I think that that means I'm most excited for um, real estate and really enjoying a lot of deep experiences with my wife, and I see that coming. Yeah,
Cool.
I can get
And
more
then
and
the
more
last
specific,
question,
but
the
yeah.
last question I just have to ask, because this is just more for me, is what is on your current either Apple or Spotify or Pandora, if you're still in that era, playlist? What
Uh-huh.
is the last thing you were listening to?
Craig Rochelle, which
All
there's a
right.
lot of what's oh gosh, Chicago every year they do the growth or the what's the conference? GLS, Global Leadership Summit. There it
Yeah.
is. I remember the acronym, I didn't remember it right away. So Craig Rochelle, I'm listening to right now. Craig Rochelle it's a pastor. He's from a Life Church, and he's really good. And then I'm reading right now Max Licato, and I'm reading so he's got, I think it's um I don't remember the title, but it's a simple read about every day being an opportunity. And then I'm reading Gary Keller, $1 Million Real Estate Agent book. So all of there's like a technical book, and then there's the spiritual or the deeper stuff too going on.
Man, you're in a lot better position than I am. The last thing on my playlist was definitely Post Malone, and so the country
Wow.
album. So I'm glad that you are the
Wow.
one leading the podcast on probably a degree of self
No,
awareness,
you
and
let it. You let it.
and
Yeah.
but
Post Malone, one of the greatest coaches in the world, just sits there and listens to Post Malone all day. I love it.
I not all day, but
And Chris
definitely
loves heavy metal. Is that what you love? Heavy metal?
there's
Like
there's
hard
a
stuff to
there's
put you
a
completely on the spot?
there's a song that I really love called "I Had Some Help," and it means nothing about what we're talking about, but I think it's a great place to end and go, hey, listen,
Love
we
it.
don't do this thing alone. We're all in service to one another,
Yeah.
and uh, anything that we do, we get to do with some help. And so that's how I'm going to type Post Malone, which is completely out of context, which I love pulling things out of context,
I love it.
into wrapping this out. Is there any last parting words that you'd like to share with people
No,
on
well,
the
thank
first
you.
inaugural podcast back?
Yeah, thank you all for well, thank you whoever gets to listen to this for giving us a chance. Listen to some old ones, and the new ones they're coming, and we're very excited for it. And Chris, I'm very grateful for you to take your valuable time. It is valuable, folks, to come on here and interview me. Again, Ben, great idea, Ben, and it's incredible to be in the space with you. And thank you for doing that, and thank you all for listening. So
Thanks for having me.
start recording. Thank you for listening to the latest episode of the TRU-U podcast. We have a special offer for our TRU-U audience today. We want to invite you to take advantage of a complimentary coaching experience with me, your coach, Ethan Schultz. You can go to ethanschultz.io and take a look at what others have to say about their experience in working with Ethan. Also, explore the options available for you to get coaching, and go ahead and click on your complimentary discovery call today with Ethan, myself. Have a wonderful day. Thank you for tuning in.